Hello, Brav. We're back with the second part of chapter 17, Driven to Desperation. We left off with Lion Berners speaking to Rosa Blondell about his wife. Oh, but just reflect what you have just said to me. No one near me but death. Death near me, she repeated, trembling. Poor child, are you superstitious as well as nervous? It was the mask I meant. The mask that was Sybil's partner in the quadrille, which we danced with them. Laughed Lion Berners. Oh, yes, I know. And they stood opposite to us, so that we danced with them more than with anyone else, and my own hand turned cold every time it had to touch his. What a ghastly mask. Yes, indeed, I wonder any man should choose such a one, added Lion. Who is he? Who is that mask? Indeed, I do not know. Someone among our invited guests, of course. It's Blondell's husband, I think. But he maintains his incognito so successfully that even I, who have discovered most people in the room, have not been able to detect his identity. However, at supper, all will unmask, and we shall see who he is. Look, is he still near me? Inquired Rosa, shaking as if with an ague. Mr. Berners turned his head and then answered, Yes, just to your left. Oh, please ask him to go away. I freeze and burn, all in 1 minute while he is near. That was enough for Lion Berners. He arose and went to Death and said, Excuse me, friend. No offense is meant, but your rather ghastly costume is too much for the nerves of the lady who is with me. I do not ask you to withdraw to some other part of the room, but I ask you whether you will do so, or whether I shall take the lady away from her resting place. Oh, I will withdraw. I know that my presence is not ever welcome, though I am not always so easily got rid of, answered Death, as with a low inclination of his head he went away. Oh, I breathe again, I live again, murmured Rosa, with a sigh of relief. And now you are sufficiently rested. The music is striking up for a lively quadrille, and so, if you please, we will join the dancers and dance away dull care, said Lion Berners, rising and offering his arm to Rosa Blondell. Law, it says there. It's an error, obviously. She arose and took his arm. Sybil, in her little Puritan's dress, moved after them. He led her to the head of a set that was about to be formed. Oh, there she is, suddenly exclaimed Rosa. Who? Sybil. Where? There. And Rosa pointed to one of the doors at which Beatrix Pendleton, in Sybil's disguise, was just entering the room. No matter. She has taken another direction from this and will not be near you, dear child. So be at rest, said Lion Berners soothingly. Oh, I am so glad. You do not know how I fear that woman, replied Rosa. But you did not used to do so. No, not until tonight. Tonight, when I met her terrible eyes, said Rosa. Come, dear, cheer up, smiled Mr. Berners encouragingly as he took her hand and led her to the order. Forward, four! The dance began, and Sybil heard no more, but she had heard enough to convince her, if she had not been convinced before, of her guest's treachery and her husband's enthrallment. She went and sat down quietly in a remote corner and bided her time, and waltz succeeded quadrille, and quadrille waltz. At the beginning of every new dance, someone would come up and ask for the honor of her hand, which she always politely refused, taking good care to speak in a low tone and disguised voice. At length, Captain Pendleton came up, and mistaking her for his sister, said, Sulking still, Trix? Not venturing to speak to him, lest he should discover his mistake, she shrugged her shoulders and turned away. All right, sulk as long as you please. It hurts no one but yourself, my dear, exclaimed the captain, sauntering off. She saw Beatrix Pendleton in her dress moving merrily through the quadrille or floating around in the waltz. She heard a gentleman near her say, I thought that lady never waltzed. I know she refused me and several others upon the plea that she never did. And she heard the other lightly answer, Oh, well, ladies are privileged to change their minds. The waltz of which they were speaking came now to an end. Sybil saw Beatrix led to a seat near her own. She also saw her partner bow and leave her. She seized the opportunity and glided up to Beatrix and whispered, There will be but one more quadrille, and then supper will be served. I'm going to my room. Do not dance in the next quadrille, but follow me, that we may change our dresses again. We have to be ready to unmask at supper, you know. Very well, I will be punctual. I really have enjoyed myself in your dress, and you, as much as I expected to. I am satisfied." At this moment, the music for the quadrille struck up, and gentlemen began to select their partners. 2 or 3 were coming towards Sybil and Beatrix, so with a parting caution to Beatrix to be careful, Sybil left the saloon. She glided up to her chamber, where she was soon joined by Beatrix. They began rapidly to take off their dresses to exchange them. "Oh, I have had so much amusement," exclaimed Beatrix, laughing. "Everybody took me for you, and oh, I have received so many flattering compliments intended for you, and I have heard so much wholesome abuse of myself, that I was fast, that I was eccentric, that I was more than half crazy, that I had a dreadful temper. And you?" "I also received some sweet flattery intended for the pretty little Puritan maiden, and learned some bitter truths about myself," answered Sybil. "How hollow your voice is, Sybil." "Bosh! Who cares for such double-dealing wretches who flatter us before our faces and abuse us behind our backs?" exclaimed Beatrix, as she quickly finished her Puritan toilet, and announced herself ready. Sybil was also dressed, and they went downstairs and entered the drawing-room together. The last quadrille before supper was over. The supper rooms were thrown open, and the company were marching in. Captain Pendleton hastened to meet Sybil, and another gentleman offered his arm to Beatrix, and thus escorted, they fell in line of march with others. As each couple passed into the supper room, they took off their masks and handed them to attendants placed for that purpose to the right and left of the door. Thus, when the company filled the rooms, every face was shown. There were the usual surprises, the usual gay recognitions. Among the rest, Harold the Saxon and Edith Fair stood confessed as Mr. Berners and Mrs. Blondel, and much silent surprise as well as much whispered suspicion was the result. "Is it possible?" muttered one. "I took them for a pair of lovers. They were so much together." "I thought they were a newly married pair who took advantage of their masks to be more together than etiquette allows," murmured a second. "I think it was very improper, don't you?" inquired a third. "Improper? It was disgraceful," indignantly answered a fourth, who was no other than Beatrix Pendleton, who now completely understood why it was that Sybil Berners wished to change dresses with her, and also how it was that Sybil's voice was so hollow as she spoke in the bedchamber. "She wished to put on my dress that she might watch them unsuspected, and she was right. She detected them in their sinful trifling, and she was wretched," said Beatrix to herself. And she looked around to catch a glimpse of Sybil's face. Sybil was sitting too near to be seen. Sybil was on the same side with herself, and only 2 or 3 seats off. But Beatrix saw Mr. Berners and Mrs. Blondel sitting immediately opposite to herself, and with a recklessness that savored of fatuity, still carrying on their sentimental flirtation. Yes, Rosa was still throwing up her eyes to his eyes, and cooing soft nonsense in his ears, and Lyon was still dwelling on her glances and her tones with lover-like devotion. Suddenly assuming a gay tone, she asked him, "Where is our ghastly friend Death? I do not see him anywhere in the room, and I was so anxious to see him unmasked that I might find out who he is. Where is he? Do you see him anywhere?" "No, he is not here yet, but doubtless he will make his appearance presently," answered Mr. Berners. Do you really not know who he is?" "Not in the least, nor does anyone else here know," replied Mr. Berners. Suddenly Rosa looked up, started, and with a suppressed cry muttered, "Good heavens, look at Sybil!" Mr. Berners followed the direction of her gaze across the table, and even he started at the sight of Sybil's face. That face wore a look of anguish, despair, and desperation that seemed fixed there forever. For in all its agony of passion, that tortured and writhen face was as still, cold, hard, and lifeless as marble, except that from its eyes streamed glances as from orbs of fire. Mr. Berners suddenly turned his eyes from her and looked up and down the table. Fortunately, now everyone was too busily engaged in eating, drinking, laughing, talking, flirting, and gossiping to attend to the looks of their hostess. "I must go and speak to her," said Lyon Berners in extreme anxiety and displeasure as he left Rosa's side and made his way around the table until he stood immediately behind his wife. He touched her on her shoulder to attract her attention. She started as if an adder had stung her, but she never looked around. Sybil, my dearest, you are ill. What is the matter? Do not touch me. Do not speak to me, unless you wish to see me drop dead or go mad before you, she answered in tones so full of suppressed energy that he impulsively drew back. He waited for a moment in dire dread lest the assembled company should see the state of his wife, and then he ventured to renew his efforts. Sybil, my darling, you are really not well. Let me lead you out of this crowded room, he whispered, very gently laying his hand upon her shoulder. She dashed it off as if it had been some venomous reptile and turned upon him a look flaming with fiery wrath. Sybil, you will certainly draw the attention of our guest, he persisted, with much less gentleness than he had before spoken. If you touch me or speak to me but once more, if you do not leave me on the instant, I will draw the attention of our guest, and draw it with a vengeance, too, she fiercely retorted, as the train ends the poetic denouement, never once removing from him her flaming eyes. And with that, we end this chapter, and we'll move on to chapter 18, Lying in Wait. Goodbye, bruv.